Hello, and welcome to another episode of It's a History podcast. I am your host, Madison, and this week we are going to be looking at the history of billboards. Billboards are something that have decorated the commercial landscape for a long time now, but just how exactly did this kind of roadside advertisement become popular and grow into what we see today? The first billboard was created by a man named Jared Bell in 1835 to advertise a circus put on by the Zoological Association around his town. Jared Bell had been a rather prolific printer in the first half of the 19th century, and this very first billboard was made up of various posters that he had attached to a large wooden board. The posters used for this first billboard were made up of a special high cloth content paper that was made up of 99.4% flax and 0.6% cotton that was made to withstand long stretches of being outdoors. The board itself measured 6 feet wide by 8 feet high. After Bell's first billboard, it is thought that P.T. Barnum of Barnum and Bailey Circus fame saw the circus billboard that Bell had made and used the idea to advertise for his own circus. The mid-1800s and the early 19th century is when billboard advertising really started to get grounded in our cultural landscape. As the railroad industry continued to grow and more people were on the move, billboards became one of the ways that notable events were being advertised. From announcing what would be arriving by train to promoting big events such as circuses coming to town, or even letting townsfolk know that President Lincoln's body would be traveling the country for the citizens to publicly mourn him. As we move into the 20th century, billboards started to transition away from just being a way to notify people of events and happenings around town to being put up to solely advertise products. Big brands like Coca-Cola and Camel cigarettes were some of the first companies to really hone in on this kind of advertising. The 20th century also brought upon the age of the automobile and eventually the expansion of the highway system. The increase in production of automobiles led to an increase in the need for regulated highways, and this expansion of the highway system and the increase in the use of billboards created its own sort of marketplace. Billboards now had a home along the roadways, and these billboards, which at the time were often painted by hand, led to the creation of some iconic imagery and slogans. The billboards of the 40s were created to be politically driven, especially during the time of World War II. The 40s also led to many to start thinking about how these billboards would be regulated. There was a popular sentiment that the billboards were a disruption of nature. The 50s and the 60s signaled a creative boom when it came to billboard displays. It was then that advertising agencies began hiring graphic designers, illustrators, and even copywriters to create advertisements that would be memorable. The advertisements would not be working if onlookers could not remember what was being advertised. In 1956, the interstate highway system developed, which was a major turning point for advertisers. Now billboards along highways would be seen by many millions more people as the highway system was revolutionized for superior interstate travel. This led to a boom in the amount of billboards that flowed alongside the roads of the highway. And there was even the addition of nighttime lighting that made it so billboards could not only be visible during the daytime, but also at night. There was also a change up in the material used on the boards themselves. Paper on its own would disintegrate easily in the weather, which led to more weather-resistant materials, with vinyl becoming a popular choice due to its durability, especially when put up against the elements day in and day out. Printing technology also changed the way the billboards looked, as high-quality prints were now able to be printed at the scale demanded by the billboards. Advertisers would no longer have to wait for billboards to be hand-painted. In 2001, the first digital billboard entered the billboard space. After working through some various models, we have landed on high-definition LED-based billboards that are brighter and clearer than previous versions, and most importantly for any outdoor advertisement, it is visible under direct sunlight. Perhaps one of the biggest advancements with the digital billboards is that the space is no longer tied to just one single advertisement. Now the billboard can cycle through multiple advertisements, which both makes the space available to more interested parties, but also brings in much more revenue to the owner of the billboards. From the very start of the use of billboard advertising, there were outdoor advertising associations that had been forming to keep regulations regarding billboards realistic. By the mid-1950s, billboard advertisements were at $100 million a year in revenue, and as recently as 2022, billboard advertising brought in a revenue of $32.2 billion. Billboards have come quite a ways from the early days of smaller posters attached together to one larger piece of wood, to the hand-painted signs of the 20th century, and the modern digital billboards that can cycle through many different advertisements. But what about the billboards and their regulations? In 1965, headed by First Lady Lady Bird Johnson, President Lyndon B. Johnson's wife, the Highway Beautification Act became law. Originally coming on the scene as the America the Beautiful initiative in January of 1965, Lyndon B. Johnson stated, "I want to make sure that the America we see from these major highways is a beautiful America." This act called for the control of outdoor advertising, which included removing certain types of signs along the ever-growing interstate system. This act also required the removal of junkyards along the interstate and encouraged scenic enhancements and roadside development. In passing the act, President Johnson had this to say about a recent trip he had taken. "I saw nature at its purest. The dogwoods had turned red, the maple leaves were scarlet and gold, and not 1 foot of it was marred by a single unsightly man-made obstruction. No advertising signs, no junkyards. Well, doctors could prescribe no better medicine for me." Then he added, "We have placed a wall of civilization between us and the beauty of our countryside. In our eagerness to expand and improve, we have relegated nature to a weekend role, banishing it from our daily lives. I think we are a poorer nation as a result. I do not choose to preside over the destiny of this country and to hide from view what God has gladly given." While well-intentioned, the act still has some flaws. Under the act, billboards can still pretty much be erected anywhere, even though there was a 660-foot corridor on either side of the interstate, specifically implemented for control of outdoor advertising. Additionally, the act allows 21 structures per mile on interstate highways, 36 structures per mile in rural primary highways, and 106 per mile in urban primary highways. If billboards were placed to their maximum capacity, there would be over 10 million billboards across the country. This also leads to thousands of publicly owned trees to be cleared annually for optimal billboard visualization. The Federal Highway Administration is also not the best at enforcing the rules that accompany modern-day billboards, which has led to devaluing of public highways as 10% of federal highway funds can be withheld due to any violation of the federal state agreements that determined the customary size, spacing, and lighting in each state at the time having been 1965. And that's where I'm going to end today's episode. Billboards are a part of our everyday lives, and they have changed over the past nearly 200 years. Let me know if you learned anything new about the history of billboards. Sources for today's episode include an article titled The History of Billboard Advertising by Sam Mikhail, an article titled The Bigger the Bolder Outdoor Advertising, and an article titled How the Highway Beautification Act Became Law by the Federal Highway Administration. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you liked what you heard, head over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave a review. If you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, you can email me at itsahistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find me over on Instagram and Threads at It's a History Podcast. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode, and I hope to have you in the next one.